There are stories that begin with words, and there are stories that begin with silence. Soft, trembling, and almost too delicate to notice. The sound of you begins with neither. It begins with a single note, fragile yet magnetic, played on an old piano that had not felt warmth in years. The moment the note echoed through the empty music hall, Xiao Zhan froze in place. He was alone, or so he thought. But there it was again. Another note, this time longer, purer, like a whisper from a memory he had tried to forget. His heart stumbled in his chest. And then he saw him. Wang Yibo stood at the far end of the stage, fingers gliding over the keys with a grace that seemed unreal. He didn't look up. He didn't have to. Every sound he made seemed to call out to Xiao Zhan without words, pulling him closer, note by note, until the distance between them was not just physical, but emotional, cosmic, spiritual. For years, Xiao Zhan had searched for that sound. It was the sound that had once healed him, inspired him, loved him. And now, hearing it again felt like the universe had paused time just for the two of them. The stage lights were dim, but their shadows met, two halves of one symphony finally colliding again. Wang Yibo's eyes lifted from the piano, meeting Xiao Zhan's gaze across the silence that followed. That silence was heavy, but not cold. It carried everything they had never said, everything they had buried beneath pride and fear. "You still play," Xiao Zhan whispered, his voice trembling like the note that had started it all. Yibo's lips curved into something faint, something almost lost. "You still listen." The simplicity of the exchange hid the storm beneath it. Years ago they had been inseparable. Two artists, two souls creating music that spoke louder than words. But fame, time, and the unspoken weight of the world had torn them apart. Xiao Zhan had pursued perfection in melody, while Yibo had sought silence in the chaos. Yet here they were again, facing each other under the same broken lights, both pretending they had moved on, when the truth was carved deep within every beat of their hearts. The sound that filled the hall next wasn't planned. Xiao Zhan stepped forward, taking a seat beside Yibo at the piano. His fingers brushed against the ivory keys, hesitant then steady. Yibo didn't stop him. Instead, their hands found a rhythm, moving together, like they were remembering an old language that only the two of them could speak. It was a melody that began with pain and ended with something like redemption. When Xiao Zhan hit a wrong note, Yibo didn't correct him. He simply adjusted, shifting the tune to make the imperfection beautiful. And Xiao Zhan looked at him, realizing that this was always what made them magic. Not perfection but connection. Their eyes met again, and this time it wasn't the silence that spoke. It was the music. Every chord, every pause, every subtle inhale between notes felt alive. Like memories were being rewritten, like love was being reborn in sound. The hall seemed to fade away, leaving only them and the echo of their intertwined souls. Later that night, they sat on the edge of the stage, legs dangling, the piano behind them glowing faintly under the last remaining spotlight. "You didn't change," Yibo said softly. Xiao Zhan smiled faintly. "I did. I just became quieter about it." Yibo tilted his head. "You used to talk through music." "I still do," Xiao Zhan murmured, glancing at him. "But the person I wanted to hear it stopped listening." Yibo turned away, his jaw tightening. "I never stopped. I just couldn't bear what I was hearing." The confession hung in the air like smoke, real, visible but untouchable. Xiao Zhan leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then maybe it's time you listened again." The words weren't sharp. They were a plea, soft, breaking, almost prayer-like. And when Yibo turned to face him, something shifted. For the first time in years, he didn't look like the guarded perfectionist the world saw. He looked human, vulnerable, fragile, real. In the weeks that followed, the two began meeting in that same abandoned music hall every night. No cameras, no audience, no words, just music. They composed together again, the way they once had, through arguments, laughter, and the kind of silences that meant more than 1,000 confessions. One evening, as rain pounded against the glass windows, Xiao Zhan was the first to speak. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't drifted apart?" he asked. Yibo didn't answer immediately. His eyes were on the piano, but his thoughts were miles away. Maybe we wouldn't be able to play like this now, he said eventually. Maybe we needed the distance to understand what we lost. Did we lose it? Xiao Zhan asked quietly. Yibo's response was a faint smile as his fingers began to move across the keys again. Listen, he said. Tell me if it sounds lost. And Xiao Zhan did. The melody was tender, haunting, heartbreakingly beautiful. It carried fragments of their old songs, woven into something entirely new. Something raw, something them. Halfway through the piece, Xiao Zhan joined in. His voice humming softly over the piano like a ghost returning home. The harmony that followed wasn't perfect, but it was real, painful, sincere, and filled with all the emotion they had tried to bury. When the song ended, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence after the last note said everything. Word of their secret music sessions eventually spread through whispers and social media leaks. Fans began calling it the sound of you, because the melodies seemed to speak like love letters written in sound. But for Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo, it wasn't about fame or reunion. It was about rediscovering the sound that had always connected them. Their final performance was unannounced. They stepped onto a darkened stage, with only a single piano between them. The crowd didn't know what to expect, but when the first note played, a hush fell over the entire room. Every eye was fixed on them, but they didn't play for the audience. They played for each other. As Xiao Zhan sang, his voice cracked once, but Yibo caught him with a soft harmony that felt like an embrace in sound. The two smiled at each other, just a flicker of recognition, but it was enough to break 1,000 hearts at once. The music swelled, climbing to its crescendo. Every emotion, every scar, every unspoken word between them exploded into the air like starlight. And when the last note faded, Xiao Zhan whispered into the microphone, "That's the sound of you." The audience erupted, but the two of them just sat there, breathing, smiling, lost in the quiet aftermath. Because in that silence, they finally heard what they'd both been chasing all along, peace. When the lights dimmed and the hall emptied, Wang Yibo turned to Xiao Zhan. "You know," he said, "that song was never finished." Xiao Zhan's smile was soft. "Maybe it's not supposed to be." Yibo's fingers brushed the keys again, one last gentle note ringing into the air. "Or maybe it's waiting for the next verse." Xiao Zhan looked at him, eyes reflecting the golden stage lights. "Then let's write it." The piano came alive once more, their laughter echoing faintly through the hall. And as the final echoes faded into the night, the world outside might never know what they played next. But it didn't matter. Because for Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo, the sound of you was never about perfection. It was about rediscovering the rhythm of love that never truly stopped playing. The air in the old music hall was thick with memories. The scent of dust, wood, and faint echoes of old applause lingered like ghosts of forgotten performances. But now there was something different about the silence that filled the space. It wasn't empty anymore. Pulsed with sound, with emotion, with them. Xiao Zhan sat beside the piano, watching as Wang Yibo's fingers danced lightly over the keys, creating a melody that sounded like the reflection of a dream. Each note shimmered, fragile yet piercing, pulling Xiao Zhan into a whirlpool of recollection and regret. For a long time, he had wondered what he would say if they ever met again. But standing here, hearing that sound, the sound that used to feel like home, words suddenly seemed useless. Yibo finally stopped playing and looked up, his expression unreadable yet filled with something that made Xiao Zhan's heart skip a beat. "You came back," Yibo said softly. "I never really left," Xiao Zhan replied, his voice low, trembling slightly. "I just forgot how to find the music." Yibo's lips curved into a faint smile, one of those rare, fleeting expressions that said more than any confession ever could. He patted the spot beside him. "Then find it again. With me." Xiao Zhan hesitated, then sat down. The piano creaked under their combined weight, but neither cared. Their hands hovered above the keys, close enough for their fingers to brush. The faint spark that followed that touch felt electric. And then the first note played. It was hesitant, unsure, like a question whispered into the night. But Yibo answered, his own note wrapping around it in perfect harmony. Slowly, a song began to form, not one they had written before, but something entirely new, something alive. The melody grew, swelling with emotion neither of them could speak aloud. Each chord was like a memory resurfacing. The laughter they once shared, the long rehearsals, the fights, the late-night recordings when the world outside didn't exist. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. Do you remember, Xiao Zhan whispered between notes, the night we finished our first song? Yibo nodded slightly, still playing. You said it was the sound of the stars falling. A smile ghosted across Xiao Zhan's face. You said it sounded like falling in love. Yibo's fingers stumbled for the first time. His eyes flickered to Xiao Zhan's, searching, trembling. Did it? Xiao Zhan asked. Yibo's silence was louder than any sound he could have made. The music stopped. For a heartbeat, only the sound of their breathing filled the hall. Then, without warning, Yibo stood up. You shouldn't have come back. The words hit like cold rain. Xiao Zhan looked up, confusion and pain flickering across his face. Why not? Because I spent years learning how to stop hearing you, Yibo said, voice breaking despite his calm tone. And now you're here again and it's all back. The noise, the memories. The sound of you. Xiao Zhan rose, his chest tightening. You call it noise, but it's what made us who we are. Yibo laughed bitterly. It's what broke me. Was. Heartbeat. Then Xiao Zhan said quietly. No, Yibo. It's what saved you. Their eyes locked. Something shifted. Yibo's mask cracked. Just a little. And for the first time, Xiao Zhan saw the boy he used to know beneath all the armor. The one who used to play barefoot in rehearsal rooms. Who used to fall asleep beside the piano with a melody still in his hands. You can pretend it didn't matter, Xiao Zhan said softly, stepping closer. But every song you've written since then still sounds like us. Yibo's throat tightened. You think I don't know that, he whispered. Every time I touch these keys I hear you. Hate it. And I love it. And I don't know how to stop. The confession shattered something between them. Xiao Zhan reached out slowly, his hand trembling. Then don't. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Then, like the universe had decided to breathe again, Yibo sat down once more. Play, he murmured. Xiao Zhan joined him without hesitation. This time they didn't think. They didn't speak. They just played. The notes rose like light through darkness. Soft, trembling and achingly real. Every sound was a confession. Every pause a heartbeat. Their fingers moved faster. Their rhythms colliding and merging until it became impossible to tell who was leading and who was following. At one point, Xiao Zhan hit a wrong chord, but Yibo adjusted instantly, twisting it into something beautiful. They shared a breathless laugh mid-song, one filled with disbelief and something like relief. By the time the last note echoed through the hall, tears shimmered in Xiao Zhan's eyes. It's beautiful, he whispered. Yibo's voice was barely audible. It's us. The rain outside began to fall harder, tapping against the windows like applause from the heavens. The piano gleamed under the dim light, and in that glow, they didn't look like rivals or strangers. They looked like music personified, two souls who had found their sound again. As the night deepened, they stayed there, talking softly about nothing and everything, the years apart, the songs unwritten, the moments lost in between. Yibo leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. Do you think people will ever understand what we were? Xiao Zhan smiled faintly. Maybe they don't have to. The music already does. Yibo turned to look at him, something warm flickering in his eyes. Then let's finish what we started. And with that, he began to play once more. A softer tune this time, gentle and tender, like a promise made in sound. Xiao Zhan joined him, their hands brushing again. No hesitation this time. No waltz. The music that followed was something beyond words. Delicate, haunting, and infinite. When it ended, Xiao Zhan whispered, "That's the sound I've been searching for." Yibo smiled, eyes glistening. That's the sound of you. The lights dimmed completely then, leaving only the soft echo of their last note drifting through the empty hall, a sound that would linger long after they were gone. And maybe, somewhere out there, the world would finally hear what they had been trying to say all along. Because love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it just needs to be heard. Musical note: if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep the music, the memories, and the love alive together.